Volume 1. Lime says that it happened on a small island that they visited during their trip. The man tells Lime he wants him to leave the squad. Lime replies that he doesn't understand what he means. Mole says he's right and wants Lime to leave their group. He calls out to Mole. Lime tells him his name and explains that about 2 years ago he was invited to join a group of adventurers. Lime reports that the lineup is as follows: the leader Mole, the strong warrior Jack, and the sorceress Emily, as well as himself. Lime asks for a bit more explanation and why it happened so suddenly. He explains that if he leaves, they'll lose the skill of good growth. The mole says that it doesn't matter and that they don't need him anymore. Lime is surprised. He explains that here in the land of Eden, every person is born with some kind of skill. Lime explains that there are a wide variety of skills, including those useful in everyday life, like finding things, and those specialized for combat, like strongman. Lime adds that some seem harmful, like clumsiness, and even cheating ones, like luck. Lime explains that his skill, good growth, is quite rare and special. He explains that the skill's effect increases the growth rate of everything around it. Lime explains that, for example, adventurers level up much faster, and even defeating a single monster gives them 3 times the experience points. Lime reports that it also affects animals and plants. The livestock and vegetables he grows grow larger and healthier. He explains that, for him, an ordinary villager, this skill was very useful. Lime explains that it was this ability that the boys noticed when they persistently invited him. Lime reports that since his arrival, Mole and the others have significantly increased their levels, and wonders if they no longer need this skill. Mole says that good growth is useful, but they've already become quite strong. Mole says that they haven't been leveling up lately, and have probably already reached the max level cap, meaning Lime's skill is useless, and Lime is completely useless in combat. Mole says outright that money was spent on him before, and now the guy's value isn't just 0, it's negative. Lime is outraged that Mole can say that and replies that he did other work besides using his skill, cooking, washing, and buying supplies. Jack yells at them to stop showing off and asks how Lime is useful, explaining that he's just a weakling who can't properly defeat any monster. Emily says they're a top-notch team and asks if Lime plans to stay with them as a simple laborer, comparing him to a parasite. Lime asks again what they said and says that when he first joined, everyone was low level and had a hard time dealing with even weak monsters. Lime explains that thanks to the good growth effect, the heroes have been steadily increasing their levels and are now S-rank heroes, easily handling difficult quests. Lime says that as soon as their level cap was reached, he recalls being called weak, useless, and a parasite. Mole reports that Lime himself understands that from now on, they'll have to take on more difficult quests. Mole says the journey is already dangerous, and protecting someone who's a burden is simply impossible. Mole says Lime can do whatever she wants. Mole explains that there will surely be those who need good growth, and they can return to their home village or find work elsewhere. The mole says that they will continue their adventures and says goodbye. Lime looks at the departing ship. Lime grins and repeats that he was called a burden. He admits his combat skills are useless, but he didn't have to speak so harshly. Lime explains that other things are more important and asks what he should do now. Lime says that this island is not even his home island. Lime explains that the Kingdom of Eden is a country spread across several islands, and that they only stopped by this one, Harumoa, en route. He explains that to leave, they need to take a regular flight to the mainland, but since he was kicked out suddenly and has almost no money left, and without money, they can't board a ship. Lime chuckles and says that there's nothing to do at the port anyway, and muses about looking for a farmer who will give him a job, and that if he'd known it would turn out this way, he would have asked for severance pay. Lime chuckles, notices the rain, and asks about the fact that it has started raining. Lime exclaims that the rain is heavy and he needs to wait somewhere. Lime spots the house and says it's there. He sighs, and it seems to him that even the weather has turned its back on him. Someone moans. The cow moos. Lime asks about the cows and whether this is a barn. Lime realizes it's that cow's stall and how strange it is. He explains that all the cows are thin, their fur is sparse, and their udders are really bad, calling the cow a poor thing. Lime says it's terrible and asks what happened to the owner of this place. The guy shouts who he is. Lime pays attention. The guy asks who he is, and the girl asks if he came to catch them. Lime starts asking what they are. He thinks they have ears and a tail, asks if they're beastmen, and concludes that the boy is a dog and the girl is a cat. Lime apologizes for scaring him and says he just wanted to wait out the rain. The boy asks again, then orders him to shut up, saying that if he wants to wait out the rain, he should go home. The boy accuses Lime of definitely coming to catch them, or that he's a thief who came for milk. Lime asks again about the milk thief and realizes it cost them. He explains that he truly has nowhere to go and just wanted to wait out the rain. The girl calls Lime brother and asks if he is lost. Lime asks again if he's lost. He explains that, on second thought, he might be, and says that his comrades actually abandoned him. The girl asks if anyone will take him away. Lime replies negatively and says he's alone now. The girl asks if he's been abandoned. Lime confirms and says something like that. The girl says that's understandable, which means he does too. The boy asks again, "So do I?" The boy starts saying that he and Millie do too, and the girl continues that the adults abandoned them. Lime asks again, and the girl says that's what they live here too. The boy explains that they lived in a big house but were suddenly brought to this island and abandoned. Lime says it's like this. He speculates that the large house was probably the estate of some aristocrat, and that it's become fashionable lately to keep beautiful beastmen for status, and they were probably kept in the mansion for that purpose too. Lime says that beastmen are stronger than humans, and treating them like human children can lead to accidents. Lime explains that animal people have animal habits, dogs need daily walks, and cats need scratching posts. Lime reports that it's common to hear of them being abandoned when caring for them becomes too much of a hassle, and the owner of these children is probably the same. Lime says such people are rarely selfish. Lime explains that the children are still very young, 5 or 6 years old, and if someone doesn't take care of them, they will die of hunger here. Lime introduces himself and asks the children's names. The boy's name is Ryu, and the girl's is Millie. Lime says what Ryu and Millie mean and is pleased to meet them, even though he's had his own share of challenges. Lime says they're all abandoned and their meeting here is a sign of fate. Millie asks what he's doing. Lime says he needs to do everything he can. Ryu is surprised. Lime announces that the bed is ready and it's for everyone. The children are surprised that the bed was made for them too. Lime explains that even hay, if folded like this, will be quite warm and soft. Millie thanks him, and Ryu says the guy isn't so bad. Lime says it's time for bed. The rain doesn't seem to be stopping, and he's very tired today. He notices the smell of hay and calls it nostalgic, noting that it's strange and he's almost never had a bed like this. Lime then says that maybe it was the smell or the fact that he was completely exhausted, but he had a very strange dream that night. Volume 2. Lime moans, thinks that it's somehow hard for him, then exclaims. Lime realizes that it is Millie and Ryu, Esti. Lime says there's nothing to be done and suggests doing it this way, but children moan in their sleep. Lime thinks maybe they should. Ryu and Millie are happy with the bed and how soft it is. Lime says he didn't think it would turn out like this, and that these children, how will he feed them starting tomorrow? Then he says he'll think about it when he wakes up. Lime wakes up and notices the time. Lime curses and says it's milking time. Then he curses again and says he's late again. Lime explains how early mornings are on the farm. Lime says good morning, and the man says he is late. The guy says not to shout so loudly, otherwise the lady will get scared. Lime apologizes, and the man asks them to pull themselves together, reminding them that he is the heir to the farm. The man offers to begin, and Lime agrees. Lime reveals his name is Fujisawa Lime, and his family has been farming for generations. Lime says that they have been running the Fujisawa farm since time immemorial, and he is currently studying to take over the business in the future. Lime says that running the farm has become more challenging recently, and they've opened a cafe serving cheese, butter, soft-serve ice cream, and so on. He explains that they also engage in various activities, such as getting tours of the farm. Lime explains that for now, he's just an intern, so he's content with caring for the cows and helping out at the cafe. Lime says he'll have to take over someday. He's not very good yet, but he likes a lot of things. The man chuckles and says Lime is doing a good job. Lime explains that pre-milking is the work that needs to be done before milking begins. He explains that he should first lightly touch the cow's hind legs to indicate that he is about to milk her. Lime explains that you need to place a bucket under the udder, then wipe it clean with a clean towel to remove any dirt, disinfect your hands, and then gently rub it. Lime explains that this is to check if the cow has mastitis or something else, adding that there's another, more important reason. Lime is surprised by how much milk there is. Lime explains that when the udder is stimulated by touching it with your hands, the happiness hormone oxytocin is released, and the milk begins to flow more easily. The cow says she feels good. Lime reports that young cows are less likely to get sick, eat well, and are easy to care for. Lime tells the cow to wait, and informs her that she'll be next. He informs her that after the pre-milking has shown everything is normal, the milking machine can be connected. The man tells Lime he's clumsy but very good at everything else, and asks why he keeps being late. Lime apologizes and explains that it's hard for him to get up early. The man explains that the next task is cleaning the barn and feeding the animals, and orders Lime to follow him, to which Lime agrees. Lime explains that he's been hammering this idea into him since childhood. His father asks Lime to listen and explains that there are 3 important points: ensuring the cows are comfortable to milk, treating all cows like princesses, and explaining that if you take care of the cows, they will produce delicious milk. Lime says he understands. Father says they need to get pure raw milk and keep the cows healthy. Lime says he lives on a farm, albeit in less than ideal conditions. Lime says that he worked well today too and is about to pass out. Then he refuses and says that he needs to set an alarm, adding that otherwise. Lime asks if it's morning already, then he curses and shouts that it's milking time. Lime is surprised. Lime says that this is it. Yesterday he was hiding from the rain in his barn and fell asleep. Millie asks Lime what's wrong. Lime wishes her good morning. Millie responds in kind. Lime thinks Millie and Ryu are still there. Lime apologizes for waking them, and Millie remarks that the weather is nice outside. Lime asks what it's like outside, and says there was no time for that yesterday. Lime is surprised. Lime says the area is quite spacious, even though it's overgrown. He explains that the grass is of good quality, and if the area is tidied up, it could even be used for grazing livestock. Lime says that's all true, of course, but he doesn't understand why he even knows anything about farming, having never worked like this before. Lime asks what the dream was and explains that it was strangely realistic. Lime suggests that these might be memories from a past life and asks if he worked on a farm, but then denies it, calling it nonsense. Lime asks Millie if the farm has a manager or owner, and she replies that she doesn't know. Millie reports that they've been here for about a month, but no one has come. Lime asks what they've been eating for the past month, and Millie replies that they drink milk when they're hungry. Lime understands. He thinks this place was abandoned for some reason. Lime says that maybe this is his chance, and explains that whether it's memories from a past life or something else, he somehow knows how to handle cows. Lime explains that he's growing well, and if he can restore the farm, he might be able to make a living. Lime wants to avoid this and doesn't want to hear those cruel words again. Lime says they simply exploited his skills and ultimately abandoned him. He says he gets angry when he remembers. Lime sums it up, saying that from now on, he'll be relying on his own strength. Millie asks him what happened. Lime muses that, fortunately, he has a minimal set of tools, albeit old ones. Ryu asks what Lime is doing, and he replies that he's cleaning the barn. Lime explains that it's a shame to keep the cows in such a dirty place, and that if they clean everything up, they'll produce delicious milk. The children are amazed at the delicious milk. Lime asks them to help him, saying the sooner they get it done, the better. Ryu agrees and asks them to rely on him, and Millie says she'll help too. Lime asks them to collect the old straw and take it outside. Millie says they're together, and Ryu says it's for the milk. Lime is surprised and thinks they're much tougher than human children. Lime remarks that it's as good as new and says they'll put down new straw. Lime thanks him and says it's much cleaner. Ryu says they tried their best, and Millie adds that she did too. Lime says they need to get water now and asks if the well is working. The guy tries to pump water but says the pump is very rusty. Ryu says he can't do it alone and offers to help. Then they put in the effort. Ryu and Millie are delighted that it worked and the water is flowing. Lime thinks it's a great job. He sighs and announces that at least they'll have some water now and it'll be good for household needs. Lime says they can't sleep with the cows and asks about the house. Lime explains that it's pretty shabby inside. Lime sneezes and says there's dust and debris everywhere, and Ryu coughs. Lime explains there's nothing to be done and suggests cleaning the place thoroughly. Ryu says he can't breathe. Lime says that first they will open the windows and air out the room, and Millie says that they will blow out the dust. Lime says that they will then take out the trash and scrub the floor. Lime says that they will then wipe everything with a rag. He reports that they washed and wiped, and then. The children are surprised. Lime says it's all minimal, but it's quite cozy. Millie is delighted. Millie is happy that there's a home for all of them. Ryu is delighted and says they'll be able to sleep peacefully now. Lime says that's right. They haven't eaten anything since yesterday. Millie reports that there's no food, and Ryu asks what to do. Lime says they'll figure something out, since they'll be living here together now. The children are surprised. Chapter 3. Lime turns to Ryu and Millie and explains that since they will be living here now, they cannot rely on others, and they will have to do everything themselves, including getting food. Millie is confused, and Ryu asks if they can do it. Lime says of course they can, he'll teach them, and suggests they look for something edible first. Millie asks again about something edible. Ryu chuckles. He says he smells something and asks Lime what it is. Lime says it's salt and pepper and praises Ryu. Ryu giggles and says not to underestimate an animal's senses. Ryu asks if that's enough, and Lime replies no, but it will come in handy for cooking. Lime says great, there are spices too, and suggests they go look for some outside. Lime says that the farm is so huge that there are probably edible herbs and mushrooms here. Lime thinks that they also need to be taught how to distinguish between edible and inedible things in case something happens to him. Lime notices a dandelion, parsley, and wormwood all edible. Lime turns to Ryu, asking her to watch carefully and remember. Ryu calls out to Lime, tells him he's found some giant mushrooms and asks if they're edible. Lime explains that he saw mushroom-shaped monsters during his travels and explains that they're dangerous. Ryu is surprised. Lime explains that brightly colored mushrooms are often poisonous, while edible ones are inconspicuous. Ryu replies, "Here's how it is." Lime tells Millie to remember too. Millie calls out to Lime, who asks, "What?" Millie asks where Lime is and calls out to her brother. Ryu asks what she's doing there. Lime gasps. He thinks the only thing coming from the grass is a voice, and it seems strange. Lime apologizes and says he was distracted for no reason. Millie asks what happened. She says how high and asks to be taken even higher, rejoicing at the height. Lime is surprised and agrees. Millie is enjoying the heights. Lime warns her to be careful. Millie tells Ryu it's a lot of fun and invites him over. Ryu chuckles and says he's not interested. The woman says that even though he says that, he seems interested and notes that he's looking. The man apologizes and says that he can't handle both of them. The woman asks what it is, and the man replies with a question. The guy says it's a cherry and says it can be used to make jam or for pies, and Lime says it's delicious and is going to pick it. The guy is surprised. The guy says it's dangerous, Millie, and he explains that everything is fine and she's a good tree climber. The guy reports that in the blink of an eye, Oka has climbed so high and is just like a cat. He takes a berry from the tree and eats it. The boy calls Millie and asks her not to eat it all alone, and Millie says the berries are sweet and sour and also delicious. Millie throws the berries down and says, "Here you go," and so does Ryu. Ryu thanks Millie and says that's enough. The man says they both worked hard. He reports that they picked wild herbs, mushrooms, and cherries for dessert and notes that it turned out well. The boy explains that they will now stack the stones to make a fire, and demonstrates how. The man explains that if the firewood is stacked this way, it will burn well, and says that they will use straw and dry leaves as kindling, after which they will set it on fire. The woman explains that her magic isn't for fun, and thanks to it, she learned to cook well in a pot. She also says that Emily could light a fire with magic. The guy explains that it's nothing special, and the two kids say that fire is cool. The guy explains that once the fire is stable, you can boil the water and add the ingredients, and Lime explains that they will season it with salt, pepper, and other spices. He says he's made a soup of wild herbs and mushrooms, and now, in his opinion, it's ready, and he wishes you bon appétit. The man says no, and the guy says it smells delicious and it's hot. A guy, a girl, and Lime are drinking from bowls. The girl says it's delicious, Lime calls it delicious, and the guy says he never thought herbs could taste so good. The guy says the mushroom broth tastes better, and when you're tired, salty things seem especially delicious. He says the guy is cool and a good cook, and the guy says he was responsible for cooking in the squad, and stuff like that. The guy says there's no need to force herself, and Lime says the dish has a delicate flavor and she eats the whole pot. The man explains that children their age need to eat a lot, they can't live on just herbs and mushrooms forever, and they need to cook something more nutritious. The guy adds, "By the way." The guy says there's a small fishing port there and thinks he might be able to catch some fish and shellfish, and when milk production stabilizes. The guy says he can trade it for vegetables and flour with the village farmers, and they'll figure out the food somehow. Lime asks who it is, and the guy notices a cow running by. The guy says they're in danger and getting close, telling Ryu and Millie to run. The guy explains that it's bad because someone's running here. The guy asks what's going on. The guy and Lime are surprised. The guy says that it is a small calf, and Lime explains that it is skinny and therefore not very fast. The guy adds that, even so, a boy is trying to restrain a calf that is kicking him hard and says that even calves kick hard. The girl and he are shouting his name. The guy calms me down, says that everything is fine and there is no need to be afraid. The boy explains to the cow that there are no enemies here, that she's a good girl and no one will hurt her. Then the boy asks the cow to come back to everyone and says, "Come on." The man asks the girl if she's okay, and the girl sighs. The girl says he's the best and cuddles up to the guy, who replies, surprised, "Ah." In the top right, the girl says, "Uh-huh," and Lime stands silently next to her. In the bottom right, Lime says, "Lime." He says that he really is the strongest and that they are safe with him. The man asks what has come over him and notices that he is caressing, as if. Lime says Millie was just as happy before. The man with Millie on his shoulders says it's high, right, and warns her to be careful, and Millie rejoices. Lime says these children are sorely lacking love. The man says it's not bad, but it's not enough, and he shouts, "Why?" He shouts "Hiya" and laughs. The guy says Ryu has already gotten his and asks for a ride too. Ryu agrees. Lime says he'll give them as much love as he can. He says he needs the difficulties more than they need him, and let them have their own difficulties ahead. He feels truly happy for the first time in so many years. It is reported that 2 weeks have passed since then, and the farm is slowly starting to look like a real one. The guy says the cows have started giving milk every day, possibly thanks to his skill, and Ryu and Millie are working really hard, which helps a lot. The man tells Lime that if this continues, then the guy tells Lime that some strange guy has come. Lime says that the strange guy, a young man and woman, notice a man and ask who he is, noting that he has the face and clothes of a true aristocrat. The man says he looked here and asks if there were any aristocrats on this island. The man greets him and asks if it was the guy who put everything in order. The guy replies that yes, it was him. The man asks the guy how long it took to get the farm in order. The guy says the farm got like this in just 2 weeks, to which the man is surprised and asks how long exactly, and the guy replies, about 2 weeks. The man asks if the guy might be a master or a genius, but the guy denies it. The man apologizes for not introducing himself right away and says his name is Satya. The guy asks. The man reports that Satya language is the ruler of the island. The boy is surprised and asks if this is true, and the boy with the ears asks what a ruler is. Chapter 4 begins. The guy says the tea is bitter, but Lime explains that it's herbal tea that's good for your health. The man says his name is He and apologizes, introducing Ryu and Millie. The man explains that everything is fine and asks her not to fuss so much, saying they are the same age. The girl is surprised and says it's true. The guy says fine. Lime asks if the Lord is coming out and who he is. Lime shouts, "I am." The boy asks Rio and Millie to watch the cows and bring them water, to which Rio agrees. He apologizes and explains that the children didn't mean to offend anyone, and the man says that, after all, they are children and it's not a big deal. The Lord says he's younger than he thought and asks when the guy arrived and if he's registered yet. The guy responds by asking about registration. Lime says he's going to collect information from the island's residents about their addresses, names, and other registration details to determine who lives on her property. The guy says that's how it is. The woman tells Lime to gather information. She'll provide registration forms for the island's residents. He agrees and asks if the stick was a tube. The woman asks if Lime plans to move in 2 or 3 years and how long he plans to live here. The boy asks how old he is and says he plans to live this life the way he wants on this island, and not alone, but with Millie and Ryu. He says he will rely only on his own strength, and they decide to continue the adventure. The girl explains that there are enough tools, food, and everything, and maybe he. The guy says he'd like to stay here as long as possible, if possible. Lime says that's true. The man says he heard that a young man and his beast children have taken over the farm. He explains that even though they're new, they've already turned the place into a model, so she doesn't mind. The man says it's true. Lime says they need to resolve the issue first, as there was a manager on this farm some time ago. The man explains that this man had no heir, so he died, leaving the place behind. Everyone in the village was very worried about what to do, as no one wanted to take on the extra work. He says that managing the land won't be easy, but he will help, and if successful, it will be a great help to the island. The man agrees and thanks. Lime says the conversation is going well and that it would be rash to dismiss him at this point, and also notes the excellent job of pretending. The guy asks what it is and says, "Here you go," and then, "Oh, yeah." The boy asks about tax documents, then repeats the word taxes. He explains that taxes must be paid to the treasury from the first year of living on the island and asks if everything is clear. The boy confirms that he does. The guy says he understands, but what if it's too expensive? He explains that given the size of the pasture, the tax must be quite high. Then the guy asks, "Is that so cheap?" The guy asks if the amount is correct and says it's bothering him. Lime explains that it might be confusing at first, but there's an explanation. The man says the calculation is correct, explains that the island is full of abandoned villages, so the land value is low, and with such a vast territory, the taxes are quite lenient. The guy says he understands. The man explains that these may be the cheapest properties in the country, and that starting in the new year, the woman asks if he's a nobleman, and if he owns carriages, and what he uses for transportation. The boy calls Lime and asks what a lord is. Lime explains that a lord is a kind of master or boss of the entire island. The girl asks if the island has a boss. The boy clarifies that the boss is a criminal and asks if they can beat him up if he demands money. The man explains that there won't be any fights, he'll take care of them, so they should respect this gentleman. The boy and girl agree. The girl asks Lime what's wrong with the cow. Lime replies that every time he passes by, the cow rubs against him. The man asks what that means. Lime pauses. The man explains that the cow needs to be milked twice a day because she recovers fairly quickly, but he says her udder is very swollen. The man suggests that the cow might want to be milked and offers to take a look. The guy explains that he can't do all this alone and says that from now on, they'll be milking too. The girl and the guy are surprised, but the guy reassures them, saying he'll teach them everything and asks them not to worry, even though they don't know how. The guy explains that they first wipe with a clean cloth, then use gentle but thorough movements. Lime says the cows are princesses who require special care. The guy shows how to do it. The boy says that if they take good care of them, they'll get lots of delicious milk, and he says the milk is delicious. The girl is delighted that they've gotten a lot of milk and shouts hooray, and the boy marvels at the amount of milk. Lime says cows are so cool and explains that if you do good to them, it will come back to them. It's that simple. The man says they'll try harder next time, and the girl and Lime agree. 3 days later, the island's resident registration form was completed, so he went to Seisha's estate to return the documents. The guy says it's a beautiful house, nothing to complain about, and that he has every right to it, even though he's a lord. Lime greets the guy and wishes him welcome. The guy says he welcomes them and their documents. Lime offers tea first, but the guy asks them to wait. The boy says he has to work on the farm and asks about tea, and the girl says everything is fine. The boy explains that Ryu and Millie are looking after the house and says that perhaps a cup of tea wouldn't hurt. The guy thanks him. Lime says the weather is nice and perfect for drinking tea outside. The guy says it's a real tea ritual and it might be impolite to just take a cup. He says he'd like to treat Ryu and Millie to some, and there are some delicious sweets there too. He says he made everything himself and asks them to relax. The guy asks if Lime does everything himself, to which Lime replies that he likes to do everything himself. Lime explains that when he was in the capital, he was constantly surrounded by servants in an entourage, which made him feel out of place. The boy says he clearly doesn't act like an aristocrat. The man explains that, in fact, they, aristocrats, are born with norms and rules, so they are educated at home. The woman says there are too many rules of propriety and rituals to follow, and the man says the constant surveillance, reproaches, and instructions create terrible pressure. The man says he always had to be careful with his words and manners, so it didn't matter what situation he was in. The guy says he's doing something and then thinks that one day he thought. Lime says he couldn't say what he wanted and he couldn't do what he wanted and asks if that wasn't the same as slavery. He explains that he's always so careful that his actions don't stand out from others and asks what the hell he's doing. The man says that the moment he realized this, everything became meaningless and he remains silent. Lime explains that on this island, status or origin doesn't matter at all. Everything is decided by actions, and in any case, he wanted to live freely. The man reports that during that same period, he became the lord of this island, and after. The man says that he decided to change his surroundings and moved here permanently, explains that the local customs were to his liking, and says that all formalities here have lost all meaning. The man says the locals enjoy the simple, delicious food, and the smiles never leave their faces. Lime says he was tired of the city, full of unnecessary rules, and was looking for a place to unwind, and this island turned out to be a good option. He says he's always enjoyed sitting quietly, and the man explains that when he decided to freshen up and move to a new place, he chose this island. He says it was a smart choice and decided to stay. Lime says it's so comfortable here, although, of course, there's a slight downside. He's afraid of forgetting all his manners. The man explains that he's clearly the kind of person who loves good food, and the taxes are cheap because of the low cost of land, not because he's just trying to do it. The man says he didn't think there could be such intelligent aristocrats in this world, and calls it an interesting case. The woman apologizes for talking too much about herself, and says it's the man's turn now. The man asks what? The woman says she looked at the documents, and asks if the guy has traveled a lot. He explains that he was part of a group of adventurers. The guy says, not quite, and asks how to address him. The girl explains that she's already said this and says it's clear. The guy is surprised and says that, after all, Lime says there's no difference between aristocrats and commoners on this island, so she asks him to address her by her first name and suggests using Sati. The man replies, "Okay, Laura," and asks what Sati means. The guy says he would like to know about his adventures, and he says that she has nothing to tell after the expulsion. He sharply asks what happened to the guy and exclaims that there was no expulsion, and the guy in response asks in surprise, "What?" The woman asks for forgiveness and says she was simply surprised. Lime asks if it's true he was expelled without even receiving compensation, and also notes that he knows his skills from his documents. The woman explains that he's a good height after all, and asks what those who expelled him were thinking. The guy replies. He reports that he was kicked out, to which the man asks if that really happened. He confirms and explains that he doesn't know the reasons, but his good height is considered a very valuable skill, and asks what those people were thinking when they kicked him out. The man explains that they said they had already become. The guy asks where, and Lime says the library, and offers to go with her. The guy replies that he knew it. The guy admires the number of books and says, "Wow." Lime explains that they had to throw out a lot when they moved, so this isn't much, and adds that this is what was expected from the yard. The boy receives the book and says he doesn't understand. The man explains that it's a skills manual, the latest version, which lists all the existing skills in the country. The man suggests looking up the good growth skill, and the boy agrees. Lime says everything around him is growing well, and says he didn't know such a detailed definition. The man explains that, in fact, the mole and the others have grown so much in the 2 years they've been with him, and explains how they could have grown so much. The man points this out to Lime, and Lime asks, "Buff means." He explains that if allies leave, the skills effect will disappear, progress will stop, muscles will weaken, work efficiency will drop sharply, and growth will become negative. The guy explains that this isn't permanent. Lime says this won't always be the case, explaining that if they experienced good growth for 2 months, they'll revert to their previous state. He explains that the guy was in this group for 2 years, meaning they'll regress for about the same amount of time. Lime explains that from that point on, they'll experience negative growth. He asks if the guy said the name Mole and clarifies whether that's the name of his group's leader. The guy confirms that it is. He says the guy joined this party 2 years ago and clarifies whether that was really 2 years ago. The guy calls Lime by name and tries to get his attention. The guy starts talking, then Lime asks him to answer honestly and warns him that he won't forgive him if he lies. The guy calls Lime by name, and Lime declares that he won't forgive him. The guy remarks that he's never seen such a piercing gaze. He's afraid to imagine what. The man says the guy's eyes definitely don't lie and believes him. The guy says he wants to make sure and thanks him. The man says it's time to continue drinking tea, and the guy agrees. The guy wonders what that was, whether they knew each other, and why the man became so interested. Lime reports on Mole and the others, and says something about him. The man explains that they acted like idiots. Lime says it's no surprise that they'll get what they deserve now. The man says he believes they genuinely didn't know the specifics of the skill, which is why they kicked Lime out, who confirms this and adds that it's a bit odd. The man asks why. Lime says that people usually find other jobs after exile and that he should have grown up just like them. The boy explains that he didn't train or fight, but was used as a training tool. The guy asks about other jobs besides fighting, suggesting he could work as a model or something similar. The man explains that there were such requests, but Mole told him not to do it and that it was beyond his level. Lime explains that they didn't want him to have personal money and experience. The guy asks what he means by that. He tells him to think about it himself and asks what would happen to him if he were to do all this alone. The guy explains that they were afraid they wouldn't level up before him, so they kept him around until they reached their maximum. Lime explains that's why they didn't allow him to do anything and made him think he couldn't do anything without them, all for the sake of their own growth. The guy gets angry and calls them. He says not to be so angry, it doesn't suit him. Sati indignantly says that she can't help but be angry. He explains that it's even good that he was kicked out of there, because that's how they met, and he would never have kicked him out without a reason, because he needs people like him. Sati thanks Lai. First, the man explains that he joined the party 3 years ago, and asks what happened then. Lime explains that this is a delicate conversation that's best left unaddressed, adding that the man is indeed not involved. Lime then says that the man needs to make a list of necessary things, as resources will be needed. He says it's better to find out about it right away, because, after all, he's not the only one. The guy explains that there's so much there, and asking for everything would be impolite. The man says that one of the residents has already expressed a desire to remodel their house, and due to the birth of their grandson, they need more space. The man says he's helping. The man explains that if the demands are reasonable, he won't object, but he shouldn't be pushy, as it will seem pushy, and it all depends on the tax balance. Lime says there's no need to be shy, and the man says he's ready to listen. Lime begins to speak. The guy asks permission, asking if he can borrow a hammer. He repeats the word hammer with a question. The guy explains that it's in the barn, the hammer is quite dilapidated and would fall apart in any breeze. He understands. Lime says he'll build a new barn and everything that goes with it. The boy is surprised and asks if that's really true. Lime explains that the craftsmen and materials will come by boat from the mainland, so it'll be cheaper to do everything at once. The boy notes that it takes a lot to restore the resources and asks. The guy explains that good height is an amazing skill, but not everyone understands its significance. He asks why he believes every word he says since they're just meeting for the first time. He explains that it's all because of his skill. The guy says, Lime says his skill is a ban on lying. The boy asks if there really is a ban on lying, to which he confirms and explains that his ability is to see through the lies of others. The boy understands that his words and abilities are not deceiving, and he agrees that he immediately realized he wasn't lying. Lime explains that his eyes don't lie and he trusts his interlocutor, which is why Sati believed him so quickly. Lime says that if he had lied about his abilities in the documents, he would have immediately kicked him out of here and considered it a crime. The guy replies that he understands. He explains that this ability can only detect lies and nothing more. The man says that he is glad to hear the story, and he expresses surprise. The boy asks how Lime ended up on this island and says he's glad he got to know her better. The man says he's a little curious but wants to know about Mole and the others. The man thanks her for the tea and says it's time to get back to work, and he apologizes for the delay. Behind the trees, the man says that even if he asks, he probably won't tell, but that's not a given, and adds, well, the woman says she definitely needs to bring some candy and a skill guide. The guy asks if that's okay. The woman confirms, saying the kids will be happy and would also appreciate it if the guy could practice his skill better from time to time, and thanks him. The guy thanks her. The guy announces that he's back and turns to Millie and Ryu, and Millie responds with a shout. The boy announces he's late and apologizes, and Lime and the girl ask what he was doing. The man offers sweets from Mr. Sati and asks them to help themselves, to which Lime exclaims in surprise. The guy tells you to wash your hands before eating, and then says that you washed your hands quickly. The girl and Lime eat with great appetite. The man says that's all, but the girl and Lime demand more. A man and woman are trying sweets and say they'll have to settle for just that today. He explains that they don't usually have such exquisite things and would like to spoil them more often. The man ponders what to do. At the same time, in the mountains far from the island of Harumoa, a man screams, then breathes heavily and says something. The dragon growls and hisses. Lime says it's impossible and asks why. The man explains that even on a dragon like that, their attacks don't work. The girl screams that the attacks don't work. The woman screams, Kaya. The man scolds the mole, and the man warns them not to come out. The man tells Emmy and Jack to back off. The boy reports that the battle has become surprisingly difficult lately. The man explains that they should have defeated a dragon of this level in less than 10 minutes, but something went wrong, and he exclaims, what's going on? Lime asks what it is. The man says he doesn't understand what's going on, and she says she doesn't understand either. The man curses and asks what the hell is going on. Lime says her magic didn't work. The man explains that this has never happened before, and the guy remains silent. The guy doesn't want to believe it, but offers to check the level. The man asks if they're already at the maximum, and he repeats the question about the level. The man says they just need to be on the safe side, and asks Emily to bring him a level meter, to which Emily replies that she doesn't understand why she should do it. The text box explains that a level meter is an item that displays an adventurer's level, typically found in large inns. The guy explains that the level, once it's raised, shouldn't fall. The man says it's true, but the girl remains silent. The man is surprised, and the guy looks at the crystal ball with the number 65 and says, ah. A boy and a man say the number 65 is a lie. The man demands to see the ball. The boy is surprised by the number 65 and asks what's going on. The woman and man in the balls are surprised and ask what's going on, and the man in the ball exclaims that he too has found himself in the same situation. The woman says it's some kind of error, and the man says the meter is broken. Lime explains that they've actually clearly gotten weaker and wonders why. The guy says the last time he checked, it was 100, so he kicked Lime out. The man explains that his skill stopped working. The man asks if good growth only maintained their level while it was nearby, and asks if that's how it works. The guy is silent. The man says he can't believe it. Lime says he can't believe it and asks if he's serious. He says maybe they should bring him back to the squad. The man asks, what? The guy wants to know how. The man says they don't even know where he is. The man explains that they'll ask for help later, bowing their heads. He says that at this level, they won't be able to defeat that dragon, and if... Lime says that, moreover, they might also degenerate to the same level as him. The man and the boy react to this with surprise. The man says he could barely even afford bread back then and won't be able to do so again. He says he's only now been able to live like a nobleman. The man asks how he can return to that life. The man asks if he really sat with them and waited for the right moment to leave at the peak, and asks if that means it's his fault. Lime confirms that he definitely knew and didn't say anything, so it's his responsibility. The man replies, wait, he knew it would happen. The guy says the mole must return something immediately and be held accountable, and the man confirms this. The guy explains that it's easy to say, but because of this situation, they'll miss the order deadline. Lime says it will be difficult to find his location, but if he's constantly criticized, he'll easily break. The man explains that, in a pinch, they can negotiate and pay him well, and they've made him completely dependent on them. The guy says that it is almost impossible to complete the current task, and explains that the dragon is beyond their capabilities. Lime says that he also put some effort into the design, and thanks for the help, and the guy says that it's a great job and adds that it's just. The man says that thanks to the help, the house is better than any mansion, and he's just a good sponsor. The man says that thanks to the help, their life has improved exponentially, and he'd be happy if they could stay the night. The woman says, of course. The man explains that this doesn't even include the new barn and cow pen. The woman tells Lime that it was actually Sati who suggested all this, and suggests that Lime think about the chickens, calling it an interesting suggestion. The guy asks why they need it. He explains that he thought if they had milk and eggs, they could make a lot of delicious products. He says he already has some chickens. The girl is surprised, and he asks if the guy likes that. The girl enthusiastically says she wants to take care of. Lime reports that the chickens he started breeding, thanks to Millie's care and the effect of the good growth skill, have grown quickly and are now wonderful hens that lay eggs every day, and everything is looking up. The boy offers Lime an omelet. Lime says he wants pancakes, and the man. The guy says they're done for today, and the woman says she'll order milk from him again next week. The guy confirms this. The text explains that the cows have matured, the milk production has increased significantly, the quality is impeccable, which Sati confirmed, and they were finally able to start milking recently. The guy reports that everything is going extremely smoothly, and they are receiving good reviews. The woman explains that thanks to the trade, they can buy vegetables, flour, and even livestock. The man says he's already forgotten the taste of omelets and pancakes. The boy asks what happened. The woman yells, sorry, and asks for milk, explaining that she's heard that milk from Haruma Island is delicious and wants to buy it for her master. The man asks her not to yell like that. The woman says she's heard the milk from this island is delicious and is ready to buy it all. The man asks her to be quiet, explaining that the cows will be scared. The man explains that the milk will be sterilized starting at noon, and sales will begin after that. The woman says she can't wait. The husband. The boy asks what the man is doing when he demands to let go of the bucket, explaining that he must get milk for his master at all costs. The man warns that it will all spill out, the boy is indignant, and the man insists on his own. The boy notices that something is wrong with the cow and tries. The boy asks him not to scream, as it will only irritate the cows even more. Lime asks what happened and inquires about the princess's anxiety. The boy explains that there's nothing to worry about and that everything is fine. The cow is making noise. Lime says that, of course, it's his problem. The guy tells her not to worry about it and to go back to the barn. The cow makes a moo sound. The guy reports that the man still hasn't gotten up and asks if the woman is okay. The man sighs and says he's okay. The guy then removes the bucket from the woman, who is lying on the ground, breathing heavily. The woman, shocked, asks what happened. The guy explains that the woman lost consciousness, and the man says he came straight from the capital and all for this milk. The woman says they're out of luck. The man blames the woman for everything and promises to report it to his lord. The girl asks what's wrong with him, and the guy orders him to get out of here. The guy with the ears offers to kick her. The man says the milk can still be collected later, and says he's glad the children weren't hurt. He explains that if the cow had truly been mad, he wouldn't have been able to stop it. The man advises calming down and keeping your voice down in such situations. He warns the children not to run under any circumstances. The boy says the milk supply has increased significantly recently, and confirms this. The man explains that everyone on the island buys milk, but there's a limit to how much can be drunk or used. The man explains that the aristocrats have special ice chests, but usually everything is kept at room temperature, and explains. The guy says he'd like to use some food and will also need some sugar. Lime asks if the guy has an ice pack, and the guy confirms. Lime is delighted and repeats ice pack and sugar, then says that the ice pack and his food supplies are at the guy's disposal. The guy thanks him and says he'll get back to him. He reports that they are provided with sugar and a camera and says, okay. The guy says that all the ingredients are in the pan and explains that he is stirring with a spatula to prevent it from burning. The boy explains that when the milk turns light brown and thickens to a certain degree, it is moved to a tray. He explains that when the milk cools and hardens, it can be cut into pieces and eaten. The girl asks what it is, and the boy replies that it is fresh. Lime says that if he has enough ingredients, he can make something other than sweets. The guy asks if he can make something other than sweets. The guy tells me that just recently, a pie with butter and cream was all the rage on the mainland. It was so delicious. The guy says he has the ingredients, but it'll be difficult without a recipe, and asks what the pie looked like. He explains that if he's not mistaken, it's now. The guy says he remembers something and asks him to wait. Lime explains that it's a round pie with cream inside and confirms that it is. The guy says that something similar is possible, but it will be difficult. He's not sure he can bake good bread. Lime explains. The woman says they need to talk to Tommy, who has the best bread, and explains that he's a baker who owns a large oven on the island, bakes bread for his neighbors at affordable prices, and is the only baker on the island. The man says it wouldn't be right to distract Tommy from his work. The guy explains to the girl that he has to try her caramel and asks her to try it, and the girl agrees. The guy thinks it was some kind of blackmail, but that's not the point. If it brings back important memories, he has to try it and suggests they get started. He explains that they'll make the dough first. The guy says he doesn't know if it will work at all and says he'll make them a better caramel. The girl asks what it is, and Lime asks if it's tasty. The boy says he'll let the dough rest, then divide and shape it, and then take it to Tommy. The man asks for help as the Lord has requested bread, and the boy agrees and tells him to rely on him. The boy explains that while Tommy was baking the bread, he returned home and made fresh cream. He explains. Lime explains that now they'll cut the bread in half, fill it with cream, and sprinkle it with sugar. The girl asks if it worked and says it's great, calling Lime a genius. Lime says he appreciates the compliment, but he doubts he'll be able to make it like that all the time since. The boy says he wonders how well he can recreate the taste of memories. He explains that it's the dessert Sati last ate with his mother and calls it maritozzo. Lime is silent. The man says the flavor is delicious and thanks Lime. The guy says it's even better than what he ate in the past. The girl asks what, and the guy replies that you're welcome. At the time, Mom had little time left, and this dessert was in fashion, so she wanted to eat something she liked. The man explains to the chef that he asked for the cream to be lighter so as not to put too much strain on Mom's body, and that he was always thinking about her health. The woman says she doesn't know how appropriate this concern was, and reports that her mother died a week after that meal. She explains that she still regrets it a little and thinks she would have liked the cake better. The guy asks Lime to put another one in front of his mother's portrait, to which Lime agrees. The guy says it was difficult, but he's glad he was able to make him happy. He apologizes and explains that he's been feeling a bit out of sorts. The man says it's okay, and then looks surprised. He offers the man some fresh caramel and asks if this is what he made earlier. Lime says yes, then marvels and admires the taste, explaining that it looks hard but melts in your mouth, and he's never experienced such a texture. The man explains that it's something of a family recipe. The woman says it could be sold for tea and admires it. He asks if it's true and says that he'll immediately start selling it to the island's residents. The woman asks him to wait and how much each item will cost. The man replies that the price will be lower for the islanders. The woman, turning to Lime, asks if he's calculated the cost accurately. Lime explains that he's afraid the treat for the islanders will be too expensive. He says that if you want to trade seriously, you need to think about the price, and thinks you'll have to target aristocrats. The man confirms that this is indeed the case. The guy explains that sugar is a very valuable product, and if you factor in the costs and the use of a refrigeration room, the figure will be quite substantial. The guy says he just made caramel to get rid of excess milk, but now it's all leading to serious questions. The woman explains that the only rich person on the island is Sati, meaning trade will only be possible with the mainland, but she doesn't have any aristocratic connections there to facilitate trade. Lime says he can ask about it and explains that Sati is a nobleman. Sati says he can help sell the caramel to the nobles on the mainland and asks if Lime can help. Lime is surprised and repeats the question about the mainland. The boy explains that caramel and milk sell well on their own, but milk needs to be used and spent wisely. He'd like to go to the mainland to sell it himself, but he's afraid to leave his children alone. The man understands this. The guy says he'll think about the offer. Lime says it's okay. He says that she needs a little time and that she will find people who can help in this matter. Lime says thank you and asks for forgiveness for dumping so much on him, and the man says that Lime has already done a lot for him and that if he sells the milk and makes a profit, it will be a plus for him. He announces that he has blended several varieties of good tea today and offers to try it. The man apologizes and says that it is time for him to go back as the children are waiting. The woman suggests having another cup later and says that if Lime wants, they can all have a tea party together, but Lime refuses. The guy says that this is too much and offers to have tea with them. He says that this is a good idea and agrees. The woman says she'll spend the night with them tonight, explaining that they have some spare rooms in the house, so she'll stay overnight and observe the work process. The man, surprised, asks if she's serious, and the woman confirms. The guy says he'll bring tea and sweets, and Lime says he thinks the kids will be happy. The man says, The girl explains that Mr. Sati has decided to stay the night. The boy greets the children, and the boy and girl ask why the boss needs this and express doubt. The man says it's all his and hopes they'll appreciate it. Lime says it's great, he can eat everything. The other man offers to split it in half. The boy suggests they work before tea, and the children agree, saying that it seems Mr. Sati wants to see their work. The man says they love him very much and asks them to stay longer, and the boy comments, "That's just how kids are." A guy with cat ears explains to a girl that wax needs to be melted to make a candle. Lime explains that candles can be used to illuminate dark places. The girl with cat ears rejoices and holds a chicken, and Lime smiles. The man pours tea into cups. He says there are many different types of magic in this world, and she explains that magic can be elemental or spiritual. The girl with the ears says she's heard of elemental magic, and the boy with the ears says spirit magic sounds interesting. They say that this kind of release is quite good from time to time. They report that after about a week, the girl says the cheesecake is delicious, and Lime says the cheesecake is wonderful, and then the guy asks if that's true. Today, in addition to collecting milk, he decided to try making a baked cheesecake. He shares the recipe for baked cheesecake. First, mix cream cheese, sugar, eggs, and flour, then add cream, lemon juice, and mix well. The girl puts a mixture of crushed cookies and melted butter into a baking pan. The guy pours the main mixture into it, after which they both say that it needs to be baked in the oven, and the process is ready. The man says Lime is a genius, and one masterpiece follows another. He also says he's out of sugar, so the baking will have to wait. Lime explains he'll have to ask someone to deliver the sugarcane and confirms this. The text on the image explains that the recipe is actually from the past. He says he can ask someone if someone moves. The man explains that this is all well and good, but milk production increases even if he makes butter and cheese every day. He explains that cheese is made when milk is heated and mixed with a starter culture, and butter is made when the milk is vigorously churned. The young man says that the islanders' consumption is insufficient, and if things continue as they are, the milk will indeed have to be thrown out, and this is happening not only on his farm. The man approaches Lime and offers to take some corn. The guy explains that he can't eat that much on his own, and the locals keep sharing, so he decided to encourage his interlocutor. Then the guy says it's the same at home, after all, everyone shares food. The guy explains that this is all the influence of his skill, and Lime asks if he has the same skill, and then he says that now is not the time to think about good growth. The man says that as expected from good growth, he suggests giving the corn to the princesses. The man agrees. The guy says that princess food is adjusted for nutritional value and that you can't just throw excess vegetables at them, and that it's a bad idea. Lime says she trusts the guy on this matter and understands. The guy says he'll have to throw it out, the woman says the milk too, and calls Vino. Vino asks, "Oh," the guy says, "It's been a while, Sati," and Sati says, "Yo," and notices Vino. The man says Radyuk Rembrandt and greets, saying that he barely managed to get out to visit. The man says he has some free time, so he's arrived unannounced, and the other man is glad to see him, saying it's good he came. The guy asks if he's Sati's friend and remarks that he seems to be an aristocrat too. He says he's probably tired from swimming all the way from the mainland. The husband. The woman asks Lime where he's going, and the man offers to have some tea and introduce himself. Lime explains that he's not important enough to need an introduction and that he needs to look after the cows. The man asks, "Look after the cows?" The man asks if someone else can manage the local farm and says Sati praised him. The boy is surprised and asks about the praise again. The man explains that the boy has the good growth skill and that such personnel are needed on their property. A guy offers to join them for 100,000 gold a month, to which another guy, shocked, exclaims, 100,000. The man jokes that he would kill Sati for such an offer and laughs, while the girl next to him remains silent. The guy the joke is addressed to quietly chuckles.